Now, the death of inmate Quinton Fortuin at Goodwood Correctional Centre has ignited outrage and raised serious questions about accountability in South Africa's prisons. Fortuin, a remanded detainee facing charges including triple murder, allegedly stabbed a warden during an altercation before being locked in a cell, beaten and set upon by dogs, leaving his body covered in bite marks and stab wounds. 4 wardens have now been suspended, with the National Commission of Correctional Services admitting to excessive force and launching an internal investigation. Well, joining us to unpack this crisis is Professor Lukas Muntingh, Director of the University of the Western Cape's Dullah Omar Institute. Professor, appreciate your time. Now, the post-mortem shows Fortuin died from blunt force trauma. Does it suggest torture, and what accountability mechanisms failed here?
Yes, there's definitely evidence then indicating in that way. Of course, we must not preempt the findings of the inquiry, and one would trust it would ultimately be a trial. But the first requirement for the crime of torture is that it must result in severe pain or suffering, whether that is of a mental or physical nature. So it seems at least that the first requirement is met. The second requirement is that it must be intentional. The third requirement is that it must be committed by a state official. And the fourth requirement is that it excludes suffering resulting from a lawful action. So if we look at and there are many of these cases, the state is responsible for ensuring the detainee or prisoner's safe custody, and there can never be any excuse for torture. And there is just simply too many of these cases happening, be that in correctional services or with the South African police. And it seems as if the government has, over the years, not been able to live up to its...
Professor, I'm going to ask you to hold that thought. We're coming back to you in a moment. We're now going to take you to Bloemfontein, where the families of 3 constables whose bodies were found in the Hennips River have met with several officials. They're discussing funeral arrangements and a possible assistance from the local government. Let's listen in.
Their loved ones, even though they reside here in Mangaung, but the burial site will be in Tabanchu.
All right, colleagues, as you know the drill, you state your name and the media house that you represent, and then you ask the questions. SABC?
Ishmael Mudiba, SABC. To the Premier and the Provincial Commissioner, ideally I would think that you would have loved, as the leadership, to see this, to give these 3 families a befitting funeral, to conduct one joint venture in terms of the program and the funeral. But it looks like you couldn't agree on a common ground. What was your thinking? Was it difficult to convince or to see things along the same lines? Thank you.
Not necessarily that we did not agree. As you are saying, that was our wish. But each family has its belief, its culture. For instance, the Senuche one, the service is going to be held in a church. They got what you call the Misa. That's any service that churches will really conduct. Now, that's how they're going to conduct their funeral. When you go to Linda's family, they got a site already, Makengen and a burial site. They already have a site of the family. That's where they bury their loved ones. This one's base as well. They got their own site in Tabanchu. That's where they bury. So those are the issues that there was in no way now we can have a joint, because there's traveling in between. And in order to give them a uniform service, we have to agree to what the family prefers. And remember, as provincial government, we cannot impose. Ours is to support the families and support their beliefs, their traditions, and so that's all what we can do.
We'd like to find out about the memorial. Is it going to be together or is it going to be separate?
Together.
It's together. It's on Tuesday, 12 o'clock at Bobby's Park.
Any other question?
It's still early. The postmortem report is not yet ready. Thank you.
Follow-up question? Are we good?
Yes.
For those that are requesting one-on-ones, you let me know. In the absence of any follow-up question based on the briefing that the media got, we will then close the media briefing. We thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Okay.
Yeah. Good the point.
All right, so we come out of that briefing with the key developments being announced that the funerals of the 3 deceased individuals, police officers, will be held over 3 days. The Senocha family next Thursday, the Linda family next Friday, and Buys will be next Saturday. Now, the death of inmate Quinton Fortuin at Goodwood Correctional Centre has ignited outrage and raised serious questions about accountability in South Africa's system. We are speaking to Professor Muntingh. Prof, appreciate your time. Thank you again for speaking to us. Just to pick up on where we left the conversation a little bit earlier on, we were obviously talking about the indications that there seems to have been some form of trauma associated with Fortuin, which potentially was a result of torture. But let's talk about necessary force, because what we understand from the reports that have come through is that Fortuin stabbed one of the prison officials, resulting in him having a broken arm, I think, and punctured somewhere in the abdomen, from what I understand. So, just how much force would have been necessary in order to contain a violent criminal?
It's very difficult to make an assessment based on the available facts, and I'm sure there will be a proper investigation. But nonetheless, the law is quite clear in the Correctional Services Act that only the minimum amount of force must be used to stabilize a situation. So force must not be used to punish the person, regardless of what they did or are accused of. Force can be used to the minimum effect to stabilize a situation. It does not continue beyond that point. The other point that we must always keep in mind when talking about prisoners is exactly that. They are prisoners. They are already in prison. They are not going to run away from there. It's not a situation like in open society where a suspect can run away from the situation. But the person is already in prison. So if any force is used, there must be a presumption that it may be excessive.
So you do talk about the prisoners already being in prison, Professor, and the inability, technically, to run away. But is it not for that very reason that some of these prisoners hope that they can get away with further criminal activities, purely because they're in there for life or for 30 or 40 years?
There are, of course, those individuals who keep on reoffending even when they are prison. But I think one must look at the larger picture here, even if one is talking about organized crime that is common in our prisons. Violence remains an issue that is not only harmful to the officials, it's also harmful to the groupings inside prison, because if there are violent incidents like this, there's firstly retaliation, and secondly, prisons typically go into a lockdown and there's heightened security, and that does not favor the prison economy. So the use of violence cannot be arbitrary and unregulated by the prisoners themselves. So it does not, nobody benefits from it. And I'm not entirely convinced that people would just randomly commit violent acts in prison.
I'm a little bit surprised, because I would have imagined that the nature of some of these criminals is that it is unwarranted. So are you suggesting that it is possible that Fortuin was driven to commit this violent act?
I don't know about his gang affiliation, But we know from other research over the years that to stab a warder often requires an instruction. It's got to be sanctioned. There is a decision-making process behind it. I don't know if that was the case here, but it's definitely something that we need to consider. And one would hope that those who are investigating it is also taking all the facts into consideration.
Professor, I'll give you my final question, and that speaks to overcrowding in this establishment. It's said to be at 48%, right? So how much of this violence stemmed from logistical neglect versus intentional brutality? I mean, it almost suggests that there's a forcing or an encouragement for prisoners to behave in manners that are natural, because if it's 48%, it's quite a significant number.
It is a very high occupation rate, but when we talk about prison overcrowding, there's a few things that we need to keep in mind. The first is, even if you look at a facility like Goodwood, it does not mean that all the cells are 148% full. Some cells may be fuller than that, and some cells may be below that level. That's the first point. The second issue we have to keep in mind is that, and this is backed up by research, that it is important how overcrowding is managed. If the prisoners spend most of the day outside of their cells, let's say in the courtyard or in open space on the prison terrain, it has a very different effect than people being locked up for the maximum of 23 hours a day. So there are ways in which overcrowding can be managed that makes the situation better or worse. And one needs to keep that in mind.
Professor Lukas Muntingh, Director of the University of Western Cape's Dullah Omar Institute, appreciate your time giving us some clarity and insights into the death and the accusation that that particular prisoner, Quinton Fortuin, was indeed abused during a situation